Welcome to our next presentation. My name is Jacob Damke, Equity Research Analyst here at ABG following the healthcare space. Next up, I have the pleasure to introduce C-RAD and the CEO, Tim Turn. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jacob. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, welcome everyone to attend our presentation today. Let's get started. So I would like to start with a short introduction. Probably many of you have heard about C-RAD. Some might not know about C-RAD yet. So some basic background. I would like to speak about radiation therapy and give a bit of a market overview before I come to our solutions, our products, what are we providing to the market, and then finish up my presentation with the business model, the growth strategy, and we can also dive into the financial highlights. So if we move to the next slide. So, I mean, if we look at C-RAD in a nutshell, I mean, we are a company active in the space of radiation therapy. Our customers are hospitals that treat cancer with radiation. C-RAD has, from a revenue perspective, a size, if we take the last 12 months, of around 260 MSEK, have a gross margin of around 60% and generating rolling 12 months operating profit of around 30 million SEK. We are an organization with around 65 employees right now, and the presentation is held by me, Tim Turn, the CEO, and I have Henrik Bergentoft, the CFO, also here in the room. So if questions come to that point, he is able to jump in as well. Move on. Next slide. So, I mean, essentially there are three ways how cancer is treated. I mean, surgery, probably well known. I mean, that's basically to take out the tumor tissue. Then there is the possibility to treat cancer with chemotherapy, with drug therapy. And then the third pillar is radiation therapy. And that is where C-RAD has focused its activities. Our customers are only cancer centers that treat tumors with radiation therapy. Next slide. So I think to assess the case of C-RAD, I mean, one very important aspect is that this technology that we are providing, it's helping to position the patient with highest accuracy, but at the same time also helps to increase the efficiency in the workflow. And what we have seen over the last years is that this technology is more and more developing to become standard of care. And there are certainly indications that, you know, support our assessment. If you look at the Western world, and I'm speaking about Western Europe, I'm speaking about Americas, North America, almost all tenders for linear accelerators are published in conjunction with a request for surface tracking, so technology that we are providing. And I think a very good example was in October when the state or the government of Spain went out with a tender to equip 80 cancer centers with linear accelerators, with new linear accelerators. They made it mandatory to have surface tracking as part of the offer of the linear accelerator. And that was certainly also a big milestone for us. And it is also showing the direction that it is no longer considered as a nice to have, but rather, as we say, it's on its way to become standard of care. Another aspect is that all major vendors, Varian, Elekta, Aktier, Mevion, have secured access to this technology. So they took different ways, but all of them secured a possibility to offer as part of their package to the customer surface tracking along with the LINAC. And then as a third element is, if we look at the proton therapy business, which is kind of the spearhead in terms of precision radiation therapy, essentially all centers are equipping their centers with surface tracking technology. So, I mean, these are only three aspects, but I mean, I think they are very strong and powerful, supporting our assessment, this technology eventually becoming standard of care. Next slide. If we take a bit more of a clinical angle to the same question, what we can see is that the adoption over the last 5 years has significantly increased. When we look at 2015 and compare that with the implementation in 2020 last year, we see that this has developed from roughly 20%, which was primarily focused on breast cancer cases where this technology was used, towards more than 70% of the patients that are treated at any given day in a radiation therapy center benefit from this technology. So also on the scientific, on the research side, there has been an enormous journey done over the 5 years to adopt this technology, to provide the technology to help treatments for various indications. And as I said, 70%, that is almost all patients that are treated. Next slide. So if we take a step back and I mean look a bit at why is this technology becoming so important? I mean, there are certain developments ongoing. I mean, imaging is getting better over time. So that means patients are diagnosed much earlier. That means the cancer is detected much earlier, while the tumor cells are still fairly small, and that requires a more precise treatment. In the past, the detection of the tumor was much later, so the tumor itself was already much larger, and it was not required to be that precise in the treatment either. So what we see now, the trend is clearly going towards this high precision treatment techniques, and what we see on this slide on the lower right corner is the development. This is showing a prostate cancer patient. On the left picture shows the traditional way how patients were treated, whereas on the right side we see the more modern way of how these patients are treated. And what we see is this hotspot area, this is the red area in the pretty much in the center of the picture image, is much smaller and very closely focused or very focused on the tumor, and the healthy tissue around the tumor is basically spared out. And that is what we mean with high precision radiation therapy, and it requires very accurate patient positioning. So if we go to the next slide, then we see a bit of development on the global scale. I mean, there are roughly 12,000 Linacs installed globally. And when we speak about standard of care, it means that according to our assessment, roughly 75% of the accelerators worldwide eventually will be equipped with surface tracking technology. If we then look at what is the market penetration today, then we are looking at around 20% of the Linacs. So there is still a huge potential between 20 and 75% to develop and deliver this technology to cancer centers around the world. Next slide. So if we look then at, or take a closer look at C-RAD, I mean, we have sold around 800 systems by now. 630 are installed, probably by now it's a little bit more. And in the order backlog, we have another 130 systems roughly. So if we look at the market and the market potential based on the numbers that I just presented, but also now looking at the new Linacs that are installed on an annual basis, we assess that around 700 Linacs on an annual basis are going to be equipped with surface tracking. Taking our average price, sales price, which is typically a little bit north of 1 million SEK, that gives a market potential of roughly 1 billion SEK per year for surface tracking. So now, for us, it is, of course, important that we get a large part of this 1 billion as our market share. And I think when we go on the next slide, we will see how C-RAD has made progress over the years. What we see here is the revenue and the operating profit, how that has developed. What we have seen is that back in 2011, 2010, 2011, I mean, this technology was really brand new. But then we entered the second phase where we kind of worked with the early adopters, primarily academic centers around the world that did initial research, published their results. And then from 2016 onwards, we see another very strong growth. And the development is basically because at that point, the adoption started to come out of the purely academic sector to the private centers, to the more regional treatment centers as well. And since then, gradually, the implementation of this high precision treatment techniques has developed, and there was the need or driven the need for advanced surface tracking technology as well. We move on. Just a very quick overview to kind of paint the landscape of radiation therapy. I mean, there are, of course, the companies like Elekta, Varian, which probably most of you know. They are focused very much on dose delivery and also partly on the software side. But there we have also independent companies like Research, for example, probably well known to most of you, one big player there. Then we have the dosimetry companies here in Sweden, for example, the company Scandidose. And then we have the part of patient positioning, where among a few other companies, C-RAD is one of the dominant players. Next slide. So if you look at the value proposition of the product, I think I touched on this earlier, but it is basically two aspects. One is the treatment efficiency and one is the improved accuracy. And now, depending a little bit on the market and the respective needs, we see a stronger interest either on the accuracy part or on the treatment efficiencies part. And typically, positioning accuracy for the patients is always a matter or a compromise of how much time do I have and what accuracy do I need. What we see, for example, in the Asian markets, where the biggest challenge is that there is not enough treatment capacity available to provide cancer care for all patients that are in need, they are very much looking at treatment efficiency. In the more developed markets, like Sweden, for example, North America, the accuracy aspect is becoming more important simply because they are a little bit further developed. And if we look at the chart on the lower right corner, so there are basically different technologies. There's the laser technology, which is fairly quick and fairly low accuracy in terms of patient positioning. At the other end of the scale, we see the cone beam CT, high accuracy, but it is very time consuming. Surface tracking, that is the bubble that is marked here with SIGRT, is at the sweet spot, delivering almost the same accuracy as a cone beam CT, but in a fraction of time. And that makes it so attractive for our customers to utilize the technology for their treatments. Next slide. So if we look at the market share in terms of installed base, we can conclude that there is roughly a 1/3, 2/3 market share split between C-RAD and Vision-RT. That is the installed base. However, if we look at the dynamics ongoing right now in the market in terms of new installation, C-RAD is definitely on the fast track to bypass Vision-RT. Vision-RT was in a close collaboration with Varian, one of the Linac vendors, that helped them to develop their sales quite significantly. C-RAD at the same time engaged in a partnership with Elekta, focusing on certain markets like US as the largest radiation therapy market, Japan, second largest radiation therapy market, and most recently also to China. What happened then is that the cooperation between Vision-RT and Varian ceased, and C-RAD at the same time developed, beside the direct sales activities, we developed this collaboration with Elekta, which is showing good results. Next slide. So if we look at the products, what we see here is a typical installation in an environment together with an Elekta linear accelerator. The cameras that are installed in the ceiling are the C-RAD cameras. They are installed in a way that they would be able to see the patient that is typically placed on the couch. That's the black plate there, and monitor the patient prior to treatment, but also during treatment. If we look at the clinical benefits for users, patients, and operators, first of all, it is dose-free. So that is clearly reducing the side effects. There are other positioning technologies available, but they are always coming with additional imaging dose, which might create side effects down the line. It is non-invasive, so ease of use is one of the key criteria for the users to use this technology over others. Then it's markerless, which basically translates in the patient comfort. So the alternative is that patients are tattooed, certain marks are brought on the patient's skin for the laser alignment. All this is not necessary anymore using this camera technology. C-RAD has put a lot of effort in developing a workflow that is intuitive and very user-friendly. So what we have done is we have put a lot of attention in integrating the technology into the environment through interfaces, communicating to the variant Linux, communicating to the Elekta Linux, and by that having a seamless user experience. And last but not least, the technology can use on more than 90% of the patients, so a very high patient compliance. So most patients comply to this technology. That makes it very versatile and very user-friendly for the operator. Next slide. So if you look at the business model, I mean, C-RAD has focused all the clinical and technical competence within the organization. Entire production is outsourced. We have contract manufacturers that are delivering the products either directly to the customers or to our partners. And we are working towards the customer through 3 different sales channels. Still today, the largest sales channel for us is the direct sales activities, where the C-RAD employees are working together with the customers to develop the projects. In countries where we don't have our own organization, we do have distributors that are promoting the product in their own on behalf of C-RAD and are partnering with us. But then the third channel, that is the industrial partnerships. When I mention Elekta partnership, this is falling into this bucket. And that is really where we see a growth opportunity also moving forward, because here we get access to the Elekta sales organization. The products are in the price book. The salespeople are incentivized also to sell and promote the C-RAD technology beside the linear accelerator. If we move on to the next slide. If we look at our strategy, I mean, we are focusing essentially on the 3 pillars: product excellence, sales excellence, and service excellence. If we look at the product first, there are certain treatment techniques and applications defined and have evolved over the years where surface tracking makes sense. And that is this high precision treatment techniques. There is a huge application still for breast treatments, for treatment of breast cancer patients. And we have really established a seamless workflow for these indications. So I think here we are good. There is, of course, still ongoing activity, but essentially the clinical application is clearly rendered. What is not a question anymore is whether or not this is something what the sites need. I think what we have seen over the last year as part of this journey towards standard of care, that the perception also in the customer's mind is, yes, I mean, surface tracking is something what is required on our Linux. And therewith, for us, the focus is now, when we speak about sales excellence, to get the message out, to get our customers excited about the technology, let them know about C-RAD, and eventually get in touch with them when they are in the process of purchasing equipment. And service excellence, if we move on to the next slide. A large part of our future business is the service business. We are, to a large extent, offering service contract together with the systems, either towards our partners or directly to the end customer. Here we see an increasing acceptance from the customers to adopt also service contracts, to buy service contracts, outsource the services of the equipment instead of doing this with in-house resources. So this business has developed, is currently reflecting around 14% of our total revenue, which is certainly still a fairly small amount, but the service business is something what is developed over time. And if we look at other companies in our space, they're roughly 40-45% of their revenue are connected to the service business. When we look at the attachment rates, in the US, essentially all customers are taking service contracts. In Europe, we are above 60%. The APAC region is still fairly low. However, here it is important to take a closer look, because the advanced markets such as Japan and Australia, the large majority also there is going for a service contract. But then for the other Asian markets, and especially China, here it is the customer's perception is not yet at the point that they believe service contracts are really required. It is slowly developing, but to a large extent, they still have their own engineering resources. Next slide. So if we are looking at C-RAD now from an investor's perspective, and perhaps using this a bit as a summary, I mean, what C-RAD is doing, we are contributing to improve cancer care. So we help the centers to improve the treatment of patients. I think it is very clear and became very clear that this technology is on its way to become standard of care. With that said, there is still a huge part of the market that is untapped. So there's a good opportunity for us to grow. C-RAD is not a new player in this fairly conservative market. We have a proven track record. We have a recognized product. We have reference site. We have a reputation in the market, which helps us, of course, to attract new customers. With our presence on the market, with the different sales channels, direct sales, distributors, and the OEM corporation, we have comprehensive market access in all relevant markets. And last but not least, I mean, we have a very stable financial platform. We have around 100 million SEK in cash on the bank right now. So definitely a possibility to finance future growth activities. If we move on to the next slide. And then I would like to close my presentation with the financial highlights. Here, looking at the last quarter, the third quarter, order intake increased in constant currencies by around 8%, creating a growth of an order backlog compared to last year of 22% and revenue growth of 25%. With that said, I mean, we need to remember 2020 was COVID year. One of the challenges that C-RAD was facing, not that the interest of our technology was less, but that customers were not always able to receive deliveries due to the pandemic. We generated a profit last quarter of 8.8 million SEK, reflecting a margin of close to 14%. We move on to the next slide. See the order intake. And I think what is very important to looking at C-RAD is to understand or acknowledge that there is a very distinct seasonality pattern. Usually we see that the beginning of the year is somewhat weak, and then the second half of the year usually comes in stronger. This is due to the fact that most of our customers are connected, or their budget year is connected to the calendar year, and usually there is an increased spending activity towards the end of the year, reflected in our order intake. Next slide. Looking at the revenue and operating profit over the last years, I think I briefly touched on that earlier, but what I want to say is if we look at the most recent years, 2018, C-RAD became profitable, and since then we have constantly been able to increase our profit. Next slide. Yeah, just a quick look at the revenue distribution. I mean, EMEA is by far the largest region for us. We have a very dynamic development in North America, which is very encouraging. US is the largest market. We are engaged in this collaboration with Elekta, which has certainly contributed to this rapid development. But we also have a strong presence in the Asian market. Australia, Japan, China are key markets for us and key to our success. Next slide. Next slide. So I want to emphasize once more the importance of the service business. What we are looking here is both the order intake and the revenue of our service business, which was close to 40% revenue growth during the last quarter. So this is a very rapid adoption, and of course, with a growing installed base, with more systems being shipped out, the service opportunity is also increasing. It was reflecting 14% of the total revenue and compared to around 11% last year. So we also see that we are running in the right direction with regards to the percentage of the service revenue. Next slide. Davis, I want to finish my presentation, and I think we have a few minutes left for questions.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, Tim. I think we have time for one or maybe two questions. And if we start, maybe what you mentioned about the market share and you sort of taking market share from your key competitor. Maybe you could just sort of highlight what has been some key success factors for that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I mean, C-RAD was always very much on the forefront of technology. I think we have the better product compared to our competitors. And I think in the minds of the customers, that is also very, very reflected by the decision of Elekta to partner up with C-RAD, but also what we have most recently published in a press release, the decision from Aktier, that they will also partner up with C-RAD. So, I mean, of course, they have done a thorough due diligence, assessed the company, C-RAD as a partner, but also the product. And I think there we are in a good position. At the same time, our main competitor disengaged in a partnership with Varian 2.5 years ago. And at that time, started to build up their own sales organization to sell the products directly. So I think there were a couple of events happening that are clearly in C-RAD's favor.
Okay, and if we get, or we will continue with the final question here. As you said, last year or partly into this year, you were impacted by the pandemic, and looking into the next quarter, Q4 is usually sort of the strongest and most important quarter for you. And with sort of worries about new COVID variants coming back, how are you feeling about the current quarter and your ability to place systems in hospitals?
Well, I mean, of course, I mean, our customers are all connected to the healthcare system, and therefore there is also very much affected by COVID. With that said, I mean, I think the biggest struggle for most hospitals in 2020 was that it was a complete new situation. It required many changes in the processes. Staff was not in the hospital, was not working from home. So, I mean, there was more of a panic situation. And of course, in our space, as well as in other areas, that has eased up during this year.
Okay, thank you. I think we're out of time, so we'll stop here. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in, and thank you as well, Tim, for participating.
Thank you.